The HOA president showed up at my door with a clipboard and a look that could curdle milk, telling me the diesel fuel tank behind my house was an unacceptable safety hazard that violated 7 different neighborhood covenants I had never heard of before. I stood there in my doorway, still holding my morning coffee, trying to process what this woman was saying. Her name was Sharon Winters, and she had moved into Riverside Estates in Sacramento, California about 6 months ago. Within 2 months, she had somehow maneuvered herself into the HOA presidency, and since then, life in our quiet neighborhood had become a bureaucratic nightmare. "Mr. Reynolds," Sharon said, her voice clipped and official, "that fuel tank needs to be removed immediately. It poses an extreme danger to every resident in this community." I looked past her at the 500-gallon diesel tank sitting peacefully behind my house, exactly where it had been for the past 8 years. The tank powered my backup generator and fueled my work truck. I owned a landscaping business, and having diesel on my property saved me countless trips to gas stations throughout the week. "Sharon, that tank has been there since before you moved in," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "It is properly installed, inspected annually, and meets all county and state regulations. I have all the permits." She shook her head vigorously, her short blonde bob swinging like a pendulum. "That may be, but the HOA has standards that supersede county regulations. This is a residential neighborhood, Mr. Reynolds. We cannot have industrial equipment creating dangerous situations." "It is not industrial equipment. It is a residential fuel tank. Plenty of people have propane tanks that are just as large." "Propane is different," she insisted, though I could tell she had no idea why. "I am giving you 30 days to remove this hazard, or the HOA will begin fining you $500 per day until it is gone." I felt my jaw clench. "You cannot do that." "The tank was here before the HOA instituted its current regulations. I am grandfathered in." Sharon's thin lips pressed into an even thinner line. "We will see about that. You will receive formal notice within the week." She turned on her heel and marched back down my driveway, getting into her white Lexus SUV that still had temporary plates. I watched her drive away, feeling the first stirrings of what would become a months-long battle. 3 days later, the formal notice arrived. It was printed on official HOA letterhead and cited sections of the covenants that I was certain had been added after I purchased my home. I dug out my original HOA documents from 2017 and spent the evening comparing them. Sure enough, the restrictions on fuel storage had been added in 2023, 2 years after I installed my tank. I drafted a response letter, citing the grandfather clause and including copies of all my permits, safety inspections, and installation records. I dropped it off at Sharon's house the next morning, since she had taken to running the HOA out of her home office rather than using the community center like previous presidents. Her husband answered the door, a tired-looking man named Greg who worked in tech. He took the envelope with an apologetic smile. "I will make sure she gets this," he said quietly, then added, "Sorry about all this. She gets really intense about stuff." That should have been the end of it. It was not. 2 weeks later, I received another letter. This time, Sharon claimed that even if the tank was grandfathered in under HOA rules, it still posed an imminent safety threat that gave the board emergency authority to demand its removal. She included a list of potential disasters: explosions, groundwater contamination, fire hazards, and something vague about property values declining. I decided it was time to fight fire with fire. If Sharon wanted to play the safety card, I would show her just how seriously I took safety. I called my tank supplier and ordered industrial-grade warning signs. Not the small decals that were already on the tank, but large, visible signs that met OSHA standards for hazardous material storage. I ordered 10 of them. When they arrived, I spent a Saturday afternoon installing them. I put the first one directly on the tank itself, a massive yellow and black sign that read "Danger, Diesel Fuel" in letters 6 inches tall. Then I placed signs on the fence surrounding the tank. Then I added signs on posts leading up to the tank area. I even put a sign on the back of my house, pointing toward the tank location with an arrow, but I did not stop there. I researched every safety regulation I could find and ordered more signs. No smoking within 50 feet. Flammable liquid. Authorized personnel only. Keep fire away. I created a veritable gallery of warning signage, all perfectly legitimate and compliant with safety regulations. The tank area looked like a hazmat facility now, which was exactly what I wanted. If Sharon wanted to make an issue of safety, I would demonstrate that I took safety more seriously than anyone. I took photos of everything and sent them to Sharon via certified mail, along with a letter explaining that I had addressed all potential safety concerns through proper signage and safety protocols. I included a detailed safety plan I had written up, complete with emergency response procedures and contact information for hazmat teams. Her response came faster than I expected. She showed up at my door that very evening, red-faced and shaking with rage. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded. "Those signs are an eyesore. They are making the neighborhood look like some kind of industrial park. They are safety signs," I said calmly. "You expressed concern about safety. I took those concerns seriously and implemented industry standard safety measures. This is ridiculous. You are making a mockery of this. I am doing exactly what you asked. You said the tank was a safety hazard. I made sure everyone is properly warned about it. The signs meet all OSHA and EPA standards for diesel fuel storage in residential areas." Sharon's face had turned an impressive shade of purple. "You cannot do this. The signs themselves violate HOA regulations about exterior decorations. These are not decorations. They are safety equipment. Would you like me to remove them and go back to having an unmarked safety hazard?" She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again. "I will be bringing this to the full HOA board. You have not heard the end of this, Mr. Reynolds. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday." I received notice along with every other homeowner in Riverside Estates, which consisted of about 60 houses arranged around a central park and community center. The notice stated that the meeting would address flagrant violations of community standards and the ongoing fuel tank dispute. I spent the days leading up to the meeting preparing. I printed copies of all my documentation, created a timeline of events, and researched HOA law in California. I also reached out to my neighbors, many of whom I had known for years. Most of them had no issue with my tank and had not even noticed it before Sharon started her campaign. Several agreed to attend the meeting to speak on my behalf. The community center was packed when I arrived. Sharon had drummed up attendance by sending out alarming emails about safety hazards and declining property values. She sat at the front table with the other 2 board members, both of whom looked uncomfortable. There was Bill Patterson, a retired accountant who had been on the board for years, and Linda Morneau, a nurse who worked night shifts and probably regretted ever agreeing to volunteer. Sharon called the meeting to order and immediately launched into her presentation. She had created a PowerPoint, which she projected on the wall using a laptop and a portable projector she must have brought from home. "As you can see from these photos," she said, clicking through images of my property that she had apparently taken from the street, Mr. Reynolds has turned his backyard into an industrial zone. These signs are visible from neighboring properties and from the street. They create an atmosphere of danger and hazard that is completely inappropriate for a residential community. She clicked to another slide showing property values. Homes in neighborhoods with proper aesthetic standards sell for an average of 15% more than homes in communities without such standards. Mr. Reynolds's refusal to remove this hazard and these unsightly signs threatens all of our property values. I sat quietly, taking notes. She went on for another 15 minutes building her case. She claimed the tank was improperly installed, despite my permits. She claimed the signs were a nuisance, despite her own safety concerns. She even claimed that diesel fumes were drifting into neighboring yards, causing health issues, which was completely fabricated. Finally, she concluded, "Therefore, I am recommending that the board vote to fine Mr. Reynolds $500 per day until both the tank and all signage are removed. Furthermore, if he fails to comply within 60 days, we will place a lien on his property." She sat down, looking satisfied. There was scattered applause from a few residents who seemed to have bought into her narrative. Sharon gestured to me. "Mr. Reynolds, you have 10 minutes to respond." I stood up and walked to the front, carrying my folder of documents. "Thank you. First, let me address the facts. I purchased my home in 2017. In 2021, I installed a diesel fuel tank with all proper permits from Sacramento County. Here are copies of those permits. I handed documents to the board members. The tank was inspected and approved by the county fire marshal. It meets all state and federal regulations for residential fuel storage. It has been inspected annually since installation, and I have all inspection reports showing it is in perfect condition with no leaks, no violations, and no safety issues." I clicked through my own photos on my phone, which I had connected to the projector. As you can see, the tank is properly contained, properly ventilated, and properly maintained. It sits on a concrete pad with appropriate containment measures. There is no risk of groundwater contamination, no risk of fire beyond what exists with any fuel storage, and absolutely no fumes drifting anywhere. I turned to face the audience. The HOA covenants at the time I purchased my home and installed this tank did not prohibit fuel storage. The restrictions Sharon is citing were added in 2023, 4 years after my installation. California law is clear that I am grandfathered in under the previous regulations. Bill Patterson nodded slowly. He seemed to be following along. "Now, regarding the signs," I continued. "Sharon came to my home and told me the tank was a safety hazard. She used words like extreme danger and imminent threat. I took those concerns seriously. I researched proper safety protocols for fuel storage and implemented them. Every sign you see is recommended or required by OSHA for facilities storing more than 250 gallons of diesel fuel. I pulled up images of the regulations on my phone. These are not decorations. They are safety equipment. If the tank truly poses the danger Sharon claims, then these signs are necessary to warn people. If the tank does not pose a danger, then Sharon's entire complaint is baseless." There were murmurs from the audience. I saw several neighbors nodding. "I am happy to answer any questions," I said. "But I want to be clear. I have broken no laws, violated no legitimate HOA rules, and created no actual safety hazards. What I have done is comply with every regulation that actually matters while calling attention to the fact that this entire dispute is manufactured." Sharon stood up abruptly. "This is not about regulations. This is about community standards and common sense. You are making our neighborhood look ridiculous." I am making one backyard look clearly labeled, I corrected. The signs are not visible from most of the neighborhood. They are only visible from the two houses directly adjacent to mine, and both of those homeowners have told me they have no problem with either the tank or the signs. This was true. My neighbor to the left was Tom Russo, a firefighter who actually appreciated that I had proper safety measures in place. My neighbor to the right was elderly Mrs. Chen, who could barely see my yard through the hedge between our properties. Linda Morneau spoke up for the first time. Do we actually have the authority to fine him for this? If he is grandfathered in under the old covenants, can we override that? Bill Patterson shook his head. I do not think we can. I have been looking through the bylaws and there is a clear grandfather clause. We would need to prove an imminent safety threat, and from what I am seeing, there is not one. Sharon's face flushed. He is making a mockery of this board. Those signs are deliberately provocative. Those signs are deliberately compliant with safety regulations, I said. If the board would like to drop the issue of the tank, I would be happy to reduce the signage to the standard minimum. But as long as the HOA is claiming the tank is a hazard, I am going to treat it like one. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Neighbors started arguing among themselves. Some sided with Sharon, mostly newer residents who barely knew me. Others defended me, pointing out that I had been a good neighbor for years and that the tank had never caused problems. A few people brought up other issues with Sharon's presidency, including aggressive enforcement of minor violations and a general attitude of hostility toward longtime residents. After 30 minutes of back and forth, Bill Patterson called for a vote on Sharon's proposed fines. He and Linda voted against it. Sharon voted for it, but she was outvoted. The motion failed. Sharon gathered her materials and left the meeting without another word, her face tight with anger. The meeting officially adjourned shortly after. Several neighbors came up to shake my hand or pat my shoulder. Tom Russo laughed and said, "Those signs are brilliant, man, malicious compliance at its finest." I drove home feeling victorious, but I knew this was not over. Sharon did not seem like the type to give up easily. I was right. 2 weeks later, I received a notice from the Sacramento County Code Enforcement Office. Someone had filed a complaint about my fuel tank, claiming it was improperly installed and posed a danger to the neighborhood. The county was sending an inspector out to verify compliance with all codes and regulations. I knew exactly who had filed the complaint. The inspection was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. I took the day off work and made sure I was home when the inspector arrived. His name was Robert Hughes, a middle-aged man with a clipboard and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Mr. Reynolds," he asked, extending his hand. "I am here about the diesel storage complaint. Please call me Marcus," I said, shaking his hand. "I have been expecting something like this." "Can I show you the tank?" We walked around back, and I saw his eyebrows rise when he saw the array of warning signs. "Well," he said slowly, "someone is taking safety seriously." "The HOA president claimed it was a hazard," I explained. "I wanted to make sure everyone was properly warned." He nodded, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Understood. Let me take a look at the installation." I watched as he examined the tank, the containment area, the ventilation, and all the connections. He checked measurements, took photos, and reviewed my permits and inspection records. The whole process took about 45 minutes. Finally, he straightened up and made notes on his clipboard. "Mr. Reynolds, this is one of the cleanest residential fuel installations I have seen. Everything is up to code, properly maintained, and actually exceeds minimum safety requirements. Whoever filed this complaint wasted everyone's time." Relief flooded through me. So there are no issues. None whatsoever. I will file my report saying the installation is compliant and poses no hazard. If the complainant wants to pursue this further, they will need to provide actual evidence of violations, which they will not be able to do because there are not any. He handed me a copy of his inspection report right there, marking everything as passed. Keep this for your records. And maybe consider reducing some of that signage. You are technically compliant, but it is a bit much. I will consider it, I said, though I had no intention of changing anything until Sharon backed off completely. After the inspector left, I scanned the report and emailed it to Sharon and the other board members, along with a polite note stating that the county had found no violations and that I expected no further harassment regarding the tank. Her response came within an hour. It was brief and icy. This matter is not closed. The next escalation came in the form of a lawsuit. Sharon, acting as HOA president, filed a civil suit against me claiming that my fuel tank and signage created a private nuisance that interfered with other residents' quiet enjoyment of their properties. She was suing for the cost of tank removal plus damages for alleged property devaluation. I had to hire a lawyer. His name was Michael Harper, a real estate attorney in Sacramento who had experience with HOA disputes. He was in his 50s, with graying hair and a calm, confident manner that immediately put me at ease. "This is weak," he said after reviewing all my documents. "She has no case. You are grandfathered in, the tank is legal, and there is no actual nuisance. But we will need to fight it, which means time and money." "How much money?" I asked. "Probably $5,000 to $10,000, depending on how long she drags this out." "The good news is that if we win, which we will, we can seek reimbursement for legal fees under California law. HOAs can be held liable for bringing frivolous lawsuits." We filed our response, asserting all my defenses and adding a counterclaim for harassment and legal fees. Michael also sent a letter to the full HOA board, not just Sharon, warning them that they could be held personally liable if they continued pursuing a baseless lawsuit. That letter created a fracture in the board. Bill Patterson called me directly, which was probably against some protocol, but he seemed past caring. "Marcus, I want you to know that Linda and I did not approve this lawsuit," he said. "Sharon filed it using HOA funds without putting it to a vote. We are calling an emergency meeting to address it. This has gone too far." The emergency board meeting happened 3 days later. This time, Sharon was the one on the defensive. Bill Patterson had done his homework, reviewing the HOA bylaws and California Corporations Code regarding board authority and spending. "Sharon, you spent $15,000 of HOA funds to file this lawsuit without board approval," Bill said sternly. "That is not only against our bylaws, it may be illegal." "I have authority to act in the interest of the community," Sharon shot back. "That tank is a threat, and Reynolds is mocking us with those signs." "The county inspector found no violations," Linda pointed out. "We have no grounds for this lawsuit. You are wasting HOA money on a personal vendetta." The argument escalated quickly. Residents who had shown up for the meeting started calling for Sharon's resignation. Someone pointed out that the $15,000 spent on the lawsuit came from HOA dues that should have been used for community maintenance and improvements. "Our pool needs resurfacing, our playground equipment is outdated, and you are spending money to harass a homeowner over a legal fuel tank," one resident shouted. Sharon tried to maintain control, but it was clear she had lost the room. Bill Patterson made a motion to drop the lawsuit and censure Sharon for exceeding her authority. The motion passed with only Sharon voting against it. 2 weeks later, the lawsuit was withdrawn. Sharon sent me a terse email stating that the HOA was dismissing the case without prejudice, which meant they could theoretically file again later, but Michael Harper assured me that would not happen. They have no case, they know it, and now they have residents angry about wasted money, he said. You are in the clear. But Sharon was not done yet. Unable to use legal means, she turned to making my life difficult in other ways. She started citing me for minor violations. My trash cans were visible from the street 15 minutes before the allowed time. My grass was allegedly half an inch too tall. My truck was parked in my driveway overnight, which supposedly violated a commercial vehicle restriction. Each citation came with a threatened fine. Each one required me to respond with documentation and evidence that I was not actually in violation. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts, and it was clearly intentional. Other residents started experiencing the same treatment. Anyone who had supported me at the meetings suddenly found themselves under intense HOA scrutiny. Tom Russo got cited for his firefighting equipment being visible in his truck bed. Mrs. Chen got cited for having decorative stones in her yard that were supposedly the wrong color. The Hendersons, a young family at the end of the street, got cited for having playground equipment that was not aesthetically consistent with neighborhood standards. The neighborhood turned against Sharon completely. A petition started circulating to recall her as president. California law allows HOA members to recall board members with a vote, and the petition quickly gathered the required signatures from 20% of homeowners. The recall meeting was scheduled for a Saturday morning in late March. It was a special meeting, and attendance was mandatory for the vote to count. I arrived early and found the community center already filling up. The atmosphere was tense but determined. Sharon arrived last, walking in with her shoulders back and her chin up, trying to project confidence. But I could see the strain around her eyes. Her husband Greg was not with her, which I found interesting. Bill Patterson chaired the meeting. He explained the recall process and the reasons cited in the petition. Abuse of authority, misuse of HOA funds, harassment of homeowners, and creating a hostile environment in the community. Sharon was given 30 minutes to defend herself. She spent most of that time attacking me, claiming I had turned the neighborhood against her because I did not want to follow rules. She insisted the fuel tank was still a hazard, despite all evidence to the contrary. She claimed the warning signs were still an eyesore, and that I was deliberately undermining community standards. This community needs leadership that will not back down from residents who think they are above the rules, she said. If you recall me, you are setting a precedent that anyone can do whatever they want without consequences. When she finished, several residents stood up to speak. Tom Russo went first. Sharon, you cited me for having fire equipment in my truck. I am a firefighter. That equipment is required for my job. That is not enforcing rules. That is harassment. Mrs. Chen spoke next, her voice quiet but firm. I have lived in this neighborhood for 23 years. I have never had problems until you became president. You make people afraid in their own homes. One by one, residents shared their experiences. The Hendersons talked about being cited for their children's playground. Another resident mentioned being threatened with fines for having solar panels that Sharon claimed were unapproved, even though they had been installed years earlier. The stories painted a clear picture of a president who had become obsessed with control rather than community. When it came time to vote, the result was overwhelming. 42 residents voted to recall Sharon as president. Only 3 voted to keep her, and I suspected 2 of those were sympathy votes from people who felt bad about the public humiliation. Sharon stood up, her face pale. You are all making a mistake, she said quietly. Then she walked out. Bill Patterson was appointed interim president until proper elections could be held. His first act was to send a formal letter to me apologizing for the HOA's harassment and confirming that my fuel tank and associated signage were not in violation of any enforceable rules. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A month after her recall, Sharon made one final attempt to get revenge. I discovered it when I came home from work one Tuesday evening to find police cars in my driveway and a fire truck on the street. My heart dropped. I parked quickly and rushed over to where several firefighters were examining my fuel tank. A police officer stopped me. "Are you the homeowner?" he asked. "Yes, Marcus Reynolds. What is going on?" "We received a report of a fuel leak and possible environmental hazard. We are investigating." I felt a cold anger settle in my gut. "There is no leak. That tank is inspected regularly. Can I see who made the report?" The officer checked his notes. "A Sharon Winters called it in. She claimed diesel fuel was running into the storm drains and creating a fire hazard." "That is a false report," I said firmly. "She is the former HOA president who has been harassing me about this tank for months. There is no leak." One of the firefighters came over. "Sir, we have checked the tank thoroughly. There is no leak, no spill, no hazard. Everything is secure." The police officer frowned. "Is there any diesel on the ground at all?" "None," the firefighter confirmed. "The containment area is completely dry. This was a false alarm." I showed the officer my inspection records and explained the entire history with Sharon. He listened, making notes. "Mr. Reynolds, filing a false emergency report is a crime," he said. "If you want to press charges, we can pursue that." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to just be done with the whole situation. But Sharon had wasted emergency resources and could have diverted first responders from real emergencies. "Yes," I said. "I want to press charges. She has been harassing me for months, and now she is making false reports to police and fire departments. It needs to stop." The officer nodded. "I will file the report. Someone will follow up with you." The police contacted Sharon that evening. I heard about it through the neighborhood grapevine. She had been informed that she was being investigated for filing a false report and could face criminal charges. 2 days later, Greg showed up at my door. He looked exhausted and embarrassed. "Marcus, I am so sorry," he said. "Sharon has been under a lot of stress since the recall. She has not been handling it well. I did not know she was going to call in a false report." "Greg, she could have gotten people hurt. What if there had been a real emergency somewhere else and those firefighters were at my house dealing with her fake leak?" I know. He rubbed his face. "She is seeing a therapist now." "I told her she needs to drop all of this, leave you alone, and focus on getting better. We are actually thinking about moving." I felt a twinge of sympathy for him despite everything. "I hope she gets help, but I cannot drop the charges. She has to face consequences for this." He nodded. "I understand. For what it is worth, not everyone in my marriage agreed with what she was doing. I should have stopped her earlier." Sharon was charged with filing a false emergency report, a misdemeanor in California. She pleaded no contest and received a fine, community service, and probation. The judge also ordered her to have no contact with me and to stay away from my property. The Winters house went up for sale in May. They moved out in June, and I heard they relocated somewhere in Oregon. I never saw Sharon again after the court hearing. With new HOA leadership, things returned to normal in Riverside Estates. Bill Patterson served out the remainder of Sharon's term and then declined to run again, saying he had had enough excitement. A retired teacher named Dorothy Kim was elected president, and she took a much more reasonable approach to community management. As for my fuel tank and the warning signs, I kept them exactly as they were for another 6 months, just to make a point. Then, one Saturday afternoon, I went out and removed all but the most essential signs. I kept the main warning label on the tank itself and one sign on the fence, but the rest came down. Tom Russo came over while I was working. "Giving up your safety regime," he joked. "I made my point," I said, pulling down a no smoking sign. "Besides, without Sharon around to annoy, it is less fun." He laughed. "You handled that whole situation perfectly, man. Malicious compliance for the win." I thought about that phrase a lot over the following weeks. Malicious compliance. It was not about being difficult or unreasonable. It was about taking someone's unreasonable demands and following them so literally and thoroughly that the absurdity became obvious. Sharon had demanded I treat the fuel tank as a safety hazard, so I did exactly that. I implemented every safety protocol, installed every warning sign, and documented everything. I had turned her attempt to force me out into a demonstration of exactly how legitimate and well-maintained my setup actually was. The diesel tank still sits behind my house. It still fuels my backup generator and work truck. County inspectors still come annually to verify everything is up to code, and it always passes with flying colors. The tank has never leaked, never caused a problem, and never posed any actual danger to anyone. Dorothy Kim stopped by one evening in late summer, just as I was loading equipment into my truck for a job the next morning. "Marcus, I wanted to apologize on behalf of the HOA for everything you went through last year," she said. "That should never have happened." "I appreciate that, Dorothy. But it is water under the bridge now. Still, we have implemented some changes. Board members now need unanimous votes before filing lawsuits or spending significant HOA funds. And we are reviewing all the covenant changes from the past few years to make sure they are reasonable and fairly enforced." "That sounds like a good plan." She glanced at the fuel tank, now marked with just the standard safety labels. "You know, I never even noticed that tank before Sharon started her campaign. I bet most of the neighborhood was the same way." She was right. The tank had been invisible until Sharon decided to make it an issue. By trying to force me to remove it, she had actually drawn attention to something that nobody had cared about before. It was ironic in a way. Life in Riverside Estates settled back into comfortable routine. The community pool got resurfaced, using the money that had been recovered from Sharon for the unauthorized legal fees. The playground equipment was updated. The neighborhood association went back to organizing seasonal events and maintaining common areas, rather than harassing homeowners over minor violations. I ran into Greg Winters once more, about a year after they had moved. I was at a landscaping supplier in Portland, Oregon, picking up equipment for a job I had taken in the area. We recognized each other in the parking lot. "Marcus," he said, looking surprised. "What are you doing in Portland?" "Work trip. Big commercial landscaping contract." "You?" "We live here now. West side of the city." He paused. "How are things in Sacramento?" "Good, quiet. The neighborhood has been much more peaceful." He nodded. "Sharon is doing better. The therapy helped." She realized she had been using the HOA stuff as a way to feel in control when other parts of her life felt chaotic. She was going through some health issues and some family stuff, and she channeled all that anxiety into trying to control the neighborhood. "I am glad she is getting help," I said, and I meant it. "I never wanted to hurt her. I just wanted her to leave me and my property alone." "I know. She knows that too now. For what it is worth, she is embarrassed about how she acted, the false police report especially. She said to tell you she is sorry if I ever ran into you." We talked for a few more minutes, mostly about Portland versus Sacramento and the landscaping business. Then we said goodbye and went our separate ways. I never saw him again either. The story made the rounds in HOA horror story circles online. Someone from the neighborhood had posted about it on social media, and it got picked up by various forums and websites dedicated to HOA nightmares. I started getting emails and messages from people dealing with similar situations, asking for advice. My advice was always the same. Document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to stand your ground when you are in the right. HOAs serve an important function when they are managed properly, but they can also become vehicles for petty tyranny if no one pushes back against unreasonable demands. I also advised people to try to stay reasonable themselves. It is easy to let disputes escalate into personal vendettas. I could have made things much worse with Sharon if I had wanted to. I could have harassed her back, filed my own complaints, or made life difficult for her in various ways. But I chose to stay focused on the actual issue, my legal right to keep my legal fuel tank on my legal property. The warning signs had been the perfect response, because they were both completely reasonable and completely unreasonable at the same time. They addressed Sharon's stated safety concerns, while simultaneously highlighting how absurd those concerns were. The county inspector's reaction had said it all. The tank was one of the cleanest, best-maintained installations he had seen, and the signs were technically compliant but clearly overkill. 5 years have passed since the whole fuel tank saga began. The diesel tank still sits in the same spot, still properly maintained and inspected. I still own the same landscaping business, still live in the same house, and still enjoy my neighborhood. Dorothy Kim served 2 terms as HOA president before passing the role to another neighbor, a retired engineer named Paul Torres, who takes a similarly reasonable approach. The HOA focuses on actual community concerns now, maintaining property values through reasonable standards, organizing neighborhood events, and managing common areas. Nobody cares about my fuel tank. Sometimes new residents ask about it when they notice it behind my house. I tell them the abbreviated version of the story, usually ending with, "And that is why you should read all your HOA documents before buying a house." Most people laugh. Some are horrified. A few seem to think Sharon had a point, though those people usually change their minds when I show them all the permits and inspection records proving the tank is completely safe and legal. The warning signs I took down are stored in my garage. I kept them, partly as souvenirs and partly as insurance. If anyone ever tries to claim my fuel tank is a hazard again, those signs are ready to go right back up. But I do not think that will happen. The neighborhood learned its lesson about reasonable governance and not letting power go to someone's head. Tom Russo retired from the fire department last year and now does consulting on fire safety. He still jokes that my fuel tank is the safest residential diesel installation in California, and he might be right. Between the proper setup, regular inspections, and my brief period of extreme warning signage, the tank has probably been examined more thoroughly than any other residential fuel storage in the state. Mrs. Chen still lives next door, now in her 80s. She tends her garden and occasionally brings me vegetables from her impressive backyard plot. She never had a problem with the fuel tank, even during Sharon's campaign. "I lived through worse things than diesel tank," she told me once in her accented English. "This is silly American problem." She was right about that. The whole experience taught me valuable lessons about standing up for yourself, knowing when to be flexible and when to hold firm, and the power of creative compliance. It also taught me that HOAs are only as good or bad as the people running them, and that community involvement matters. If more people had been paying attention to HOA meetings before Sharon took over, her election might have been prevented or her overreach stopped earlier. Now I make a point to attend HOA meetings regularly, not because I expect problems, but because active participation is the best prevention. I encourage my neighbors to do the same. A healthy HOA requires engaged members who will speak up when things go wrong. My business thrived throughout the whole ordeal and afterward. The story actually brought me some attention and new clients who appreciated that I was someone who stood up to unreasonable authority. Several clients specifically mentioned the fuel tank saga when hiring me, saying they liked working with someone who had backbone. The diesel tank continues to save me time and money. Instead of making constant trips to fuel up my truck and equipment, I fill up at home, usually once a week. The backup generator has proven its worth during several power outages, keeping my refrigerator running and my home office functional while neighbors dealt with spoiled food and dead devices. In a weird way, Sharon's crusade against the tank actually validated my decision to install it in the first place. Her attempt to make it seem dangerous only highlighted how safe and well-maintained it was. Her attempt to make it seem inappropriate for a residential area only demonstrated that residential fuel storage is common, legal, and unremarkable when done correctly. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had just given in to Sharon's demands. If I had removed the tank after her first complaint, she probably would have moved on to harassing someone else about something else. But I also would have been out thousands of dollars for tank removal, thousands more for the loss of convenience and efficiency. And I would have set a precedent that the HOA could force homeowners to remove legal, permitted improvements based on nothing but personal preference. By fighting back, I protected not just my own rights but potentially those of other homeowners in the future. The reformed HOA governance under Dorothy and now Paul has been much more reasonable, partly because the fuel tank incident demonstrated what can happen when an HOA oversteps its authority. The neighborhood is better for it. Property values have actually increased, not because of strict enforcement of petty rules, but because it is a pleasant place to live where neighbors get along, and the HOA functions as a service organization rather than a regulatory nightmare. Every time I fill up my truck from that diesel tank, I think about the absurd battle that was fought over it. I think about the warning signs, the meetings, the lawsuit, the false police report, and the eventual resolution. It seems almost unbelievable now, like something that happened to someone else rather than something I actually lived through. But it was real, and it mattered. It mattered because property rights matter. It mattered because standing up to petty tyranny matters. It mattered because how we organize our communities and treat our neighbors matters. The diesel tank saga became a defining story in Riverside Estates, one that gets told to new residents as both a cautionary tale and a reminder of why community governance needs checks and balances. It is the story of what happens when one person with a little authority decides to wage war against a reasonable neighbor over something that was never actually a problem. And it is the story of how sometimes the best response to unreasonable demands is to comply with them so thoroughly and literally that you expose their absurdity. Those warning signs, plastered across my backyard like something from an industrial facility, were my way of saying, if you want to treat this like a hazard, I will show you what treating it like a hazard actually looks like. The message was received eventually. It took longer than it should have and cost everyone more time, money, and aggravation than necessary. But in the end, reason prevailed over stubbornness, and the neighborhood moved forward. My fuel tank remains, quiet and uncontroversial, doing exactly what it was designed to do. The warning signs stay in my garage, a reminder of an absurd chapter in my life as a homeowner. And I stay vigilant about HOA matters, knowing that eternal vigilance is the price of reasonable governance. Sharon learned, hopefully, that community leadership is about service and facilitation, not control and enforcement. Greg learned, hopefully, to speak up earlier when a spouse is going down a destructive path. The neighborhood learned that paying attention to HOA elections and staying involved in community decisions matters. And I learned that sometimes the right response to an unreasonable person is not to get angry or escalate, but to take their claims so seriously and implement their concerns so thoroughly that everyone can see how baseless those concerns were in the first place. 5 years later, life goes on in Riverside Estates. Children play in the updated playground. Residents swim in the resurfaced pool. HOA meetings happen monthly with reasonable attendance and reasonable discussions. And my diesel tank sits behind my house, properly maintained and appropriately labeled, exactly where it has always been and exactly where it belongs.